Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Cup Reviews. That's right, we've branched out now into multiple prongs of the cups, and now we get to distinguish which one we are in. This one, we're in the reviews, and this week we're going to be talking about the 2015 production of Hamlet, directed by Antoni Cimolino, starring Jonathan Goad as the titular Prince of Denmark. Joining me again this week is our friend, actually I can now say, General Assistant of Cup of Hemlock, as well as longtime friend of the company, Ms. Jill. Jill, welcome back for another episode.
Hello, Mac. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. I have a change of scenery here tonight. I'm actually at my parents' place for a Father's Day weekend. So
beautiful. Speaking of fathers in this play, I mean, that is the perfect timing of doing this recording. What is in your what is your ensemble and what is in your cup?
Yes, so I'm just wearing a nice basic black t-shirt to kind of bleed into the Hamlet, Hamlet
the morning.
The morning, the blacks. My earrings I'm going to save for a little bit later. They kind of bleed into something else I'm going to say. And so my cup today, because I'm at my parents' place, there's a bit more of an array of booze here. So I made a cocktail. It's called the Gravedigger. I actually found online. Now, usually it calls for hard apple cider, some sort of whiskey, and ginger ale. But I had to kind of improvise with what we have here. So I have Granny's Apple Pie Moonshine from a distillery out in Nova Scotia, Annapolis, Nova Scotia. And then I put a little bit of diet ginger ale in it. So it's a bit of a knockoff of the Gravedigger, but nevertheless.
The knockoff Gravedigger. I love that. I love that. Next on our panel this week, we have a new friend of the company. She joined us with our play reading group, and now we're bringing her on to join our theater reviews. A friend of Jill's, Ms. Tanisha. Tanisha, hello.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on our panels. You've been wonderful in our greetings, and then it's nice now to have you join us on another platform.
You guys are so kind. Thank you.
Thank you. So what is in your cup today, and did you theme your ensemble for the play?
Okay, so here is my cup. I have a collection of bear mugs. I'm drinking coffee to keep myself awake. And I'm wearing black to be moody with Hamlet and a cardigan to match Polonius's cardigan.
Yes.
Love it. Well done. Well done. And then we have our lovely literary manager, resident dramaturg, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz, welcoming him back once again for another episode.
Oh, thanks for having me back for another episode.
Yes. Between you and Jill, you've been the most frequent appearances throughout this series.
And you as host.
Yes. Well, yes, of course. And Ryan, what is your cup and what is in it this week?
Same old green coffee mug with orange pico tea. I think I've drinking that every appearance I've made so far. My ensemble isn't interesting. I do have black shirts. I probably should have thought to wear one of those, but I don't know. It's a lot of work to think about what you're going to wear for this. I don't know how you do it with Jill and Tanisha.
Gotta spice it up.
Yeah.
Perfect. And this week, I've shaken it up with my cup. In honor of Gertrude's goblet in the show, I have my own lovely goblet, and it is filled with a raspberry crystallite. So we get a nice ruby red filling. So there we go. So we get a nice wine and goblet. And my ensemble is themed as well. I've broken out my black for morning, but I also brought in my multicolored Shakespeare tie in honor of the lighter tones that can be found within this play that sometimes get overlooked. And we'll talk about that later down the line. But there we go. We're all here. We all have our drinks. So let's dive into this sucker. Because, this is a play that was quite divisive. We're going back and reading the reviews from people. There were some people who loved what was done, some people who did not. So let's see where we kind of fall on the spectrum here. So Jill, why don't you kick us off? Who was the best performed character of this particular production of Hamlet?
Perfect. So I have a tie for that. And my earrings, actually, this is beautiful, Mac. You let me go first because I can finish my ensemble. So I have, they're little flowers with a pearl in the middle.
Ah.
Because my two actors that really hit it on the nose this week for me were Adrian Goad as Ophelia, and I believe I'm pronouncing this right, but Geraint Lynn Davies as
Geraint Wayne Davies.
Geraint Lynn Davies, thank you.
Yeah.
As Claudius. Yeah. So
Very good.
both of them, I think, first of all, their physicality they brought into both their characters was impeccable. So I guess just to speak to Ophelia first, I usually have seen Ophelia's played more into the dainty, timid arc throughout the piece. And what I really loved what Gold did is she had that stark switch into like an animalistic, very carnal, visceral vibe to her. And it kind of made her more relatable, this character. I was quite emotional actually when you started to see her demise in the later acts. And I thought it allowed a bit of more of a feminist approach to Ophelia, which I think is very easily overlooked with this ingenue character. So that to me, and like I said, just as an actor, the throes that she kind of put herself in, that is some hard ass work. Sorry.
It is
the only word that can really come out for that. And then just talking back to Geraint Lynn Davies, he was such an interesting Claudius for me because he was so touchy-feely and creepy and kissy, and I'd never seen a Claudius be that physical. I've kind of only seen that he was kind of more standoffish and kind of just in the shadows, but I really liked how Davies, like, really every person that he interacted with, he had to touch or he had to lift. But then when kind of Hamlet did it to him, he was stone. And so it just added another level of that character I've never seen.
He was
before.
pulling double duty between playing the ghost
and so with
and
that
Claudius.
too, I'm like, this is a dramaturg's dream, because it took me a while to be like, is that the same actor? And then once I pulled up the program note, it was like, oh my gosh. So again, that added so many levels too, because you're like, was King Hamlet and Claudius, like, are they twins? Or like, is this sort of, is the ghost we're seeing, is it Hamlet sort of forgetting his father and like placating the next father figure, like on top of this ghost? You know, like there was little things that stuck out for me there. And then also just to kind of speak on, because this obviously we're seeing this through a filmed lens, Davies was another actor for me, similar to we had mentioned in the Coriolanus panel. Graham Abbey did a really good job of, hey, this is a stage production, but tonight we're filming it. He did a really good job of playing both filmic and theatrical acting, which not maybe some of our audience don't know, but they're both very different mediums. So I thought Davies played that sort of hybrid role for us in this production. He did a really good job of taking some of his moments more filmic for the virtual audiences, and then resonating physically too. So Adrian Goad as Ophelia and Geraint Lynn Davies as Claudius.
Yes, and we will see Geraint return as Falstaff down the road in our Merry Wives episode, and he is quite different from this Claudius. So, he is wonderful. Tanisha, how about you? Who was your stand-up performance of this recording?
I also had a toss-up, and it's interesting that you brought up Claudius, because I was debating putting him in my top. I was debating because I was like, he was so surprising to me. I had never seen a Claudius that was like that. And so my standouts were Polonius and Hamlet. Those two were just very
great.
And it was funny because Hamlet, there's times where I actually didn't like him, but then there's times he made me love him so much. So that's why I thought I had to put him up there, because a character that can make you kind of hate them and love them is always interesting. Sorry.
No, that's great. Yeah, Jonathan Goad had been a long time kind of contender for Hamlet, and they had approached him way back in, I think, 2008 to do it, but he turned it down. And Ben Carlson, who we know from Timon of Athens, he stepped into the role, and then when Antoni Cimolino approached him this time around, Jonathan Goad said he was ready to take on the titular prince And then Tom Rooney, Tom Rooney once again, he always just comes in with these great parts. I mean, his Polonius really stood out to me, especially in the Act 2 scene where he's trying to explain the letter and you see him going really fast with that dialogue, but still making it understandable. So yes, shout out to Tom Rooney, who once again plays that kind of mix of that kind advisor, but also kind of that snakish gentleman who once again who is plotting against you all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought he was very like authentic and like very like there's a lightness to it. Like he kept a lot of humor in it, which I loved. And I also wanted to note that Christopher, he played for film and for the stage, and there was just some beautiful moments where he like caught me off guard. I think the one was I wrote it down in a note. It was like what makes what a piece of a man is, or something like that. And it was he looked right at me, and I was like, oh, true, okay.
Yeah, and
he
caught ya.
Yeah, there were so many moments where he like actually like caught me and made me think. It like just related it to me, so it was interesting, and I didn't expect that from him.
No, that's fantastic. Ryan, how about you? Who stood out to you tonight?
Yeah, so I kind of want to, in agreement with Tanisha, say the thing that I say on quite a few of these panels is that even if I'm going to focus in on someone else, obviously the title character, the star performer, always, the whole show's success is hinged on their performance. And I think Jonathan Goad was, in my opinion, an excellent Hamlet, and I do want to make sure he gets his due for that. He really... this is only the second time we've seen him in this series. He was Kent in Lear. And if you recall, I was a little not enamored with that performance. So now just seeing him come back in such a prominent role like this, and he really sold me on it. He was the perfect blend of silly and spicy and a little kind of... He didn't fall into the melancholy that I find too many actors playing Hamlet do too much, and maybe we'll talk more about that in a later question. But I think... Yeah, and he really, I don't know, he kind of just reminds me of a young Paul Gross, which I feel like for Stratford is a bit of a second coming. Of course, this guy has to play Hamlet, but so I just thought he has that perfect charm and demeanor for the performance. But the one I actually do want to single out as my pick is Tim Campbell as our Horatio. Which... Yeah, it wasn't a very showy role. Horatio very rarely is, and he kind of just came very subtly, did his job. But he played the role with more of a maturity than I find I'm usually seeing. Usually it's Hamlet's younger, more sprightly sidekick that, and that's certainly an interpretation. He is the one who has to represent the future and tell the story, so there is a temptation to kind of have, and I also... Goad, I guess, was playing more of an older Hamlet than we usually see anyway, so the fact that two of them being schoolfellows definitely seemed within the same age group, and they both brought that maturity a little bit. But yeah, Tim Campbell, if I'm not mistaken, he was Alcibiades and Timon earlier in this run. Yes. Yeah. And that was another one I remember that we were maybe a little less enthused about because, and I think what I'm now praising him for as Horatio was part of what we were maybe critiquing previously, is that he kind of just blended into the background there in what should have been a very prominent role. And here he did that perfectly, that he never stole the show, but was always filling out the scenes in such an important way. So that's why Tim Campbell as Horatio gets my vote for standout performance.
Wonderful. I'm loving it.
What a stark contrast too between that and Alcibiades. Campbell. Just
right.
I didn't even realize, you love that when you see recurring actors and you're like, oh wait, yes, that's with them. Okay, love it.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm loving this, and we all have different people on our list. For me, I have Shauna McKenna as Gertrude.
Yes.
As my
close one for me as well.
Because to be honest, Shauna McKenna and Lucy Peacock, they're the two dames of Stratford. So whatever they do, they're going to do something special with the part. And what I loved about her performance of Gertrude is that she didn't play her as one note. You got to see the slow descent of Gertrude throughout this play, where bit by bit, as she's watching this world that she loves and knows collapse around her, she starts to crumble and crack as well. And the fact that a lot of times you don't get that with our Gertrudes kind of stay stoic throughout the whole play, and then at the end it's like, oh, I'm poisoned. Darn it, I'm dead. Here it's like, oh, darn it, Shauna McKenna, you're gone.
And I loved, like, to bounce right off of that, that in her little, like, finale there, she was playing it almost like she was already drunk before that, which I've never seen that interpretation before. That was certainly interesting, and that's why she was so, like, quick to just keep drinking and not listening to her husband's warnings. Yeah, it was quite a choice, I must say.
We might get into this again later, but just like that, just the idea of the alcoholism in the relationship. I thought the church scene with Claudius and him sort of being under the influence of the bottle too. Yeah. It didn't kind of hit me till I was after the show, like meditating on the piece as a whole, and I was like, oh my goodness, alcoholism, at least it was alluded to, played a role in the relationship.
Polonius too had one moment where he was like offering, I think it was Ophelia, a glass, and when she refused, he poured it into his glass, so he had a double there. Yeah, like there was an interesting undercurrent of alcoholism throughout this production that definitely paid off in that final scene there.
Yeah. And I also will say that Shauna McKenna's facial expressions were so great, because Gertrude doesn't, like, I forgot how little she actually has to say in the play. Like, you think that she's going to be this one of these kind of grand dames of the stage where she's going to talk a lot, kind of how almost have, but yet she almost was almost like the Duchess of York in Richard III, where she's kind of just sprinkled throughout the tale that we're watching. And but yet every time she was on stage, even her facial expressions showed exactly that slow cracking of Gertrude, where it was just,
she's a character that basically has to listen and have stuff sort of thrown at her, but doesn't really retaliate back.
Exactly. Like the whole time it was just all in, like it was just all in her face, and you could just see her slowly but surely almost dying in her eyes as she's watching all these people kind of get picked off one by one, whether it's Polonius or her husband even, or Hamlet getting sent away and then coming back, and then even especially that scene with her and Claudius sitting on the edge of her bed after Ophelia's come in, and it's just the two of them on stage. It's one of these beautiful kind of marriage things where she's just holding Claudius, and you can just see the last bits of her breaking away, where she just can't, she's barely able to hold anything together anymore. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, TJ, and you were gonna add something.
Oh no, I was just commenting on the alcoholism. It was hysterical, and she was like, "No, I don't want it."
Right? Yeah, it's very interesting. Good choice by Antoni Cimolino to have that alcohol kind of poison kind of spread throughout, where it's this continual bit that people are doing to keep going. It's great. Okay. Next we have, what was our favorite production or design element of this production? Tanisha, why don't you kick us off for this one?
I thought it was very interesting, like the dark, just everything black, the black boxes, the stairs, like it was very little actual like setting and props, and I thought that just it made it more raw. It was just about like the relationships. I thought that was such a great choice. I also really loved the simplicity of the ghost. I loved it. It was just an actor with a light and like the armor that like, it was so, it made the moment so interesting when the ghost was embracing Hamlet, and then you could just see the metallic armor hand, and it just gave me ideas for other productions, like, oh, okay, like a ghost can just be a light on stage with an actor. At first I didn't even realize, I thought it might be just a person, like a backstage person holding it. They would have actual ghost do that. I just thought, what an interesting way to do it.
No, that's great. Yeah. Ryan, what sayeth you? What is your favorite?
See, it's interesting. So, Tanisha, I kind of agree with you that the set was a standout, but I feel like for different reasons, I would say, because, the set, I kind of thought there was like a lot going on with the set. Like it wasn't, I guess it was kind of like maybe not like a fixed set and more things brought in, but I think I had like a similar comment on this for the Tempest one, but like a shout out to the ASM crew for just how quickly they manipulated this space and moved everything in and out, change rooms. There were several scenes in this where I had to like remind myself that, oh, this is happening in the exact same space that the previous scene happened in, because it just felt so different and changed. And so I think that is like a testament to the set and the props and the crew for really making that happen. And like maybe some of this is heightened by the fact that we're watching it in like a filmic version as opposed to in the theater, but I think it was a great use of space and really simple stuff. One thing I will also add to that comment is, just like in Timon, I feel like we're shouting out Timon a lot in this episode, but just like in Timon, I complimented the costumes because there was the clever detail of like the modern Greek flag on Alcibiades' military uniform. On Polonius's desk was a modern Danish flag, and next to that was, I believe, the EU flag. So even though this isn't set in like today, so to speak, they still have those echoes of this ain't medieval Denmark, which are always a nice touch.
Yes, very true. Very true. I also will piggyback off Ryan because the set was also my shout out of the show. Having come from York, where we live off boxes to make our set, and just the way of configuring boxes. Yeah. It was so smart what they did. Like the fact that Ancient Cimolino started with the idea of the boxes being tombstones that then just morphed into church pews in the chapel, or being pushed together to make Gertrude's bed in her bedchamber. It was just all these kind of great little ways of using these boxes and showing just the simple way of doing theater. And then also the fact that he also didn't use special flooring. That's the Tanya Mazejevich stage floor that they've had for years. So the fact that that was just there, they didn't do anything special before. It was just a very barren set. But then at the same time, you had the trap door where it doubled as the grave being present throughout the whole thing. They didn't try to hide the hole in the floor. It was just this piece of death that just emanated like just these death vibes throughout the entire show. It was fantastic. I love the way they did the set. That was one of the things where I was just, every time they did a scene change, I was like, okay, what are they doing with these boxes now? To shake it up a bit, because it was just fascinating to continually watch that. I had to go back and rewatch some of them again just to be like, what are they doing? What are they representing? And once you got it, it was like, oh, these are so great. So yeah, set for me was my shout out. Jill, what say you? What was your shout out?
Yeah, great snowball for me too, because set was sort of honorable mention for me. So just kind of on the whole realm of the set being simplistic, like Tanisha was saying, but also the little details that kind of Ryan was sprinkling into. I loved the first image where everyone comes on stage to sort of celebrate Claudius and Gertrude's union. And they have these blurred mirror-esque panels on the back. And to me, it was like, ooh, this is such a good way to start this piece, because it's like blurring the truth, you know? Like it was almost to me like, here's a bunch of mirrors, you know, see your true selves. But every single character in this doesn't really know the other, like their partners to a fruit, like to a whole, right? There's always something missing, or a facade, right? So I really liked the blurred panels. Was a really, really accurate introduction to the vibe of the piece. But kind of going back to what Tanisha set us off on, lights and the gobos for me for this production took the crown for various different reasons. I loved the use of light for the transitions, like Ryan was saying, like hats off to that ASM crew, but wonderful sort of splitting the stage in half and having it totally dark, but then like the lip sort of lit for Horatio and Hamlet to have their conversation. The beautiful image of Hamlet climbing the boxes to sort of speak to the ghost. It almost, because he's dressed in black too, and the way that the lights were hitting, it really had us only focus on his visage. And it kind of, to me, was like, again, this is a core facet of the play, because we're forced to just focus on his mind, you know, like it was almost like a floating head. And then the different materials of light fixtures, I guess, you know, there was lanterns, there was the spotlights when the players came on, there was the sort of like white light to represent going into the light of death, or so that what else did I write down here? The idea that light sort of bookended the whole play. Like we started with that light of death funeral sort of esque thing, and we ended with that too. Yeah, so hats off to set, but I think the lighting pattern and the gobos were brilliant too. The
Yes.
window pane gobo of Ophelia's face, like hitting Laertes' face. The idea of the like foliage sort of gobos that were happening too. So
I also really liked, speaking of lighting, in the scene where Hamlet's going to kill Claudius but stops because he's praying. There's like this cross of light hanging above, which is just like, such a stark image in the otherwise very dark setted scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
So good. I couldn't agree more. Lighting, yeah, the lighting was just like with Macker's, where the absence of light really did give this feeling to the audience.
Now you brought that up too, Mac. We talked about in one of our panels how Hamlet is sometimes seen as Macker's light, or Macker's the PG version, the PG version of Macker's. But I really think the light, and might I also mention the sound quality of this production too, I think upped the ante a little bit of making its reputation a little more grounded and not necessarily in the shadows of Macker's.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For sure. All right. I'm going to kick us off with the next section, which is the weakest part of the production, because Ryan started to allude to my choice ever so briefly, but mine was the costumes. I like the costumes in this. I liked Antoni Cimolino's original concept, which was the idea of World War I and the fact that the world was changing in World War I. But then we went all over the place. Like we had Hamlet in a medieval tunic. We then had like Gertrude Davis dressed very modern day, almost like American president look with just the tie and the suit and the pin. And then you also had men dressed in like World War II and World War I military costumes. Like it was just all over the place. There wasn't any sense of why this was so all over. Like I didn't find there was any DDD. Like even with Coriolanus, where yes, it was modern, but we also had some other elements mixed in of some more ancient Roman style. There was still that you still could kind of make the connections of what Robert Lepage was trying to do with that kind of old meets new. Here it just felt really jumbled. Like they had gone into the Stratford warehouse of costumes and just kind of picked out certain ones they liked. And it was like, I mean, the one standout was Gertrude's dresses. I did love Gertrude's beautiful ball gowny outfit she wore, but everything else I was like, I don't get it. And the fact that Hamlet didn't look princely throughout the entire play, basically, and I was like, darn it, like Hamlet, at least dress the part of who you are.
Well,
like,
I don't know.
Why are you always in like knit sweaters and not like a proper suit? Like Laertes looks better than you.
Well, Mac, if I could chime in defense of the costumes a little bit, which again wasn't my first choice for what I wanted to highlight, but I do think it's maybe a little better than you're giving it credit for.
Okay.
And I think so. The way I read the fact that it didn't seem like a consistent time period, and that, like you said, it sort of jumps around seeming, I kind of read that as being consistent with what Antoni Cimolino said about World War I and everything's changing. So because the play very much starts in that like turn of the century kind of feel, and then things start to get progressively more modern looking throughout, I kind of saw that as that moment accelerates the process of modernity, and that is represented through the costumes. Maybe I'm grafting too much of my own headcanon onto this, but that was kind of how I wanted to read that, and I thought that suited me just fine. In terms of like the Hamlet's costumes in particular, like, yeah, well, I don't remember, like, in what scene did he have a medieval tunic? I don't even remember that. He was mostly wearing sweaters. Like,
the very first scene, he has that sweater medieval tunic that almost looks like the mission with the rings all over it.
Right.
And in fact, it also has a zipper going through. You can see the zipper in the middle. I was like, this isn't princely at all. Like,
but Hamlet is an unusual kind of prince. He rejects these titles, and he, like, lives by his own way. Like, I've seen quite a few versions of this where he wears like very ridiculous costumes to show his antic disposition, and I'm glad we didn't go in that direction. But the fact that Laertes does look better than him and more princely than him, I think, is an important part of the fact that Laertes is at his core a foil to Hamlet. He's the one that, my father's been killed, I'm immediately going to go avenge him, as opposed to Hamlet who's like, let me think about it for a bit. Like, so
true.
I don't see that as a big deal that Hamlet was dressed not for the part of a prince, because in my mind he was dressed for the part of Hamlet.
Fair enough. I don't know. For me, the costumes, it just bugged me watching it through it. I was like, I don't get where you're going with this, Antoni Cimolino. Like every other time, you've done a really good job mirroring your sets and your costumes, making them all very cohesive. This time, it just felt off. And that was something reading like other reviews from 2015. There were a few other people. I think Golden Globe was another one that mentioned that as well. So there was a few people who were a little put off by the costumes. Jill, what sayeth you? What was your element?
Yeah, so I don't have a particular element per se. I have, I guess, some moments and some character work that I didn't sit super well with me.
Perfect.
So, fun fact, Hamlet is actually the only Shakespeare that I've ever acted in. Yeah, my
What about Portia, the Merchant of Venice, on our other show?
Yes. Virtually, I was Portia, yes. But yeah, my third year class, the Theatre and Drama Studies program I went to, it's the Sheridan College and University of Toronto hybrid program that Tanisha is currently in as well. We did Hamlet for our third year classical project. And I had the opportunity to, a lot of us, we did split casting, and we also jumbled up all the casts, so you would never really be playing with the same cast. It was a really cool concept, but had the opportunity to play Rosencrantz and Gravedigger, so either or, with some sub-characters that I would also come in, but Rosencrantz and Gravedigger were my main ones. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is a lot of the supporting characters for me in this production fell flat a little bit, and maybe it's because of my experience with these sort of lesser in the spotlight characters, and because it was more of a school project, we were able to kind of delve more into those characters. But I just like, for some examples, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and even I get Horatio, like the point you were making, Ryan, like that does make sense to me, but I just kind of wanted more from the supporting characters in this piece, and I don't think it was on the actors' onus per se. I think it was more of like a directorial thing. So I definitely think everyone still hit the mark in the positions they were in, but I know I've seen productions, and I reading the play, there's definitely more color to be given to those characters, and I just that didn't happen for me. And yeah, and I think that could add more fuel to the piece overall. And so sometimes when the energy was dipping a little, I think it was just because those characters weren't necessarily given the space to have the agency that they could have. And just a couple other things that I had an interesting relationship to when death happened in this play. I felt like there needed to be more of a shock factor, or like a meditation from the characters that were on stage. And so the first sort of off feeling came to my attention when Polonius dies, because to me, that's the moment where tangibly we're sort of getting the sense that possibly Hamlet is mad, or is going mad, or there's something that has happened now that we can put a face to a name that is sort of spirals him into his demise, right? And so I think just from Gertrude and even Hamlet himself, like when Polonius died, I needed there to be more of like a wave of okay, like now we're here. And I think a lot of this sort of came up for me again in the last duel scene as well, because it just was like that, even on the page and on stage, that scene is very clippy. It's like this person dies, this, like I get it happens fast, but there needed to be more of a like an ambiance of whoa, like, you know, because that's scary when there's murder, literally, especially with Polonius. I was like, wouldn't you be super scared that someone literally just stabbed someone behind your back? So just I needed more, and I've said this a lot in previous panels too, just sometimes more of a beat or a realization of something actually bad happening, and it's never, it's not just talked about anymore. There's action placed behind it, right? So yeah.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that, especially during the last scene. That last scene, it all happens so fast. I had to rewind that moment to be like, did we take any minute to acknowledge that, like, oh, Gertrude died, Laertes died, all these important figures of the play had now all of a sudden just fallen over. But it all happened so quickly. And you're right. I think there should be a little bit more of a moment to let I have that realization for those characters of what happened.
Especially because there's so many other raw moments in the play that happen that allow us to kind of sit with the thoughts
Yes.
of Hamlet or sit with the sadness and sorrow of Ophelia.
Yeah.
Tanisha.
Yeah, for me,
What
it's
say
so
you?
interesting because we're gonna go back to costumes because they just threw me off. I was like, "Who's Hamlet?" Oh, and then seeing the sitting arrangement, I was like, "Oh, well, that must be Hamlet just because of where he's sitting." And then they showed it was him, and I was like, "Okay, interesting choice." Like, I get the all black. I love the all black, but I was just like, there could have been like just a little bit something more. Like, he didn't have to look princely at all. I totally love that Verity looked more like a prince. I like that. That was interesting. They're just, I don't know. It was very weird to me. And then, I don't know, Ophelia's clothing, it was so, like, boring. Like, honestly, all of it was just, like, I get where he's going with the World War I, and modernity. And I was just so bored. And like Gertrude was the only one where I was like, okay, nice costume. Like, and like the suits can be just like, I don't know, like, I'm not saying that all suits are boring. They're just, I've seen productions where it just looks way better. I don't know.
One thing that also threw me off were the trench coats of the guards in the first scene.
Yeah.
I kind of liked that vibe, but then as I was watching the scene further, I was like, this is a bit chunky for me.
It was
like
exactly
detective-esque, but you're holding a giant gun as opposed to like a handgun. I don't know.
Then there was a sword. I was like, what is this?
See, that's exactly it. I don't feel there was any real DDD done on this. I just went into the costume warehouse and went, all right, let's just have some fun, everybody. We're the first production of the season, so we get our pick of what we want for costumes. Here we go.
My other mention too was like the supporting characters, because I was like, were they supposed to just be like very statuesque? Like the one, I was just like, there's not a lot of stuff going on with them. And like, now that you say that it might have been a directorial choice, I'm like, okay, that's so interesting. But I did.
Fun fact: behind me, where my finger is pointing, are little mugs of Laurel and Hardy, and RNG gave me those vibes off the get-go. I was like, yes, this is going to be such a good toss-up. And then the comedy was kind of sucked from them a little.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Richard got the laugh in that moment with her and Claudius, where Claudius mixes up the names and she corrects him. Yeah. That was the one moment where I was like, oh, that's just some comedy here with them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fair. I do think it's interesting. Like, I feel like I came the closest to picking a minor character when I picked Horatio, but the fact that we all picked like main players in this story and didn't really like give much love to the supporting players is testament to this fact that we're now seeing issues with some of the way that was handled. And yeah, like there's a lot of minor characters in this play. It is kind of hard to give them all the due they need when at the end of the day it is just Hamlet's story.
Yeah, no, but Horatio was the only standout out of the characters that I was like,
I agree,
like that I was interested in and captivated by. Like everyone else, I was like, are you even thinking about stuff right now?
Right, exactly. Ryan, how about you? What is your weakest part of the production?
So I also have two.
Okay.
I'm going to start with what I think is the more controversial one, because Tanisha, you already pointed it out as something you like, and Mac, you substantiated it. Tom Rooney. I usually love him. This is the first, and I think it's just relative to my expectations. I was a little disappointed. But this is one of my less favorite Poloniuses I've seen, I must say. And the one thing, and Jill and I were talking about this a little bit before we started filming this, but like something that he did very frequently, and as always, I was following along in my text while watching, so I could very clearly see that it wasn't actually what it seemed like. But he kept stumbling in this way that was very clearly deliberate and part of the character, but they were like pregnant enough pauses that it always felt to me like, oh no, is he actually forgetting his line? It didn't like come across as like that smooth sort of polished, like I am the doddering fool who's like, you know, Porky Pig struggling to find his words. Like it very much felt like he, the actor, was ghosting in front of us. And that really, like I had a hard time kind of And like he did it from beginning until he died midway through the show. And yeah, it really, I found it wasn't his best. And like my favorite performance of his that we've seen so far was Holofernes last week in Love's Labour's Lost. And what I loved so much about that was how on the ball, doing the tongue twisters, doing like little flourishes and like verbal acrobatics around it. So then to see this right after that, it's like, I know you can do everything with these words. It's almost a shame that you're playing dumb in this way. I get that it's part of the character of Polonius, but it didn't really do it for me.
It's interesting too, because he would have played that role at the end of this season, because Love's Labour's Lost and Hamlet were in the same one, and Love's Labour's was kind of in that final.
So that was his redemption.
Okay. So, if anything, I mean, there is to sort of take a little bit of the stress off of him. There was a very stark contrast in his styles that he brought to both pieces. But I do agree with Ryan a little bit too. There was moments of like, oh, is he like, we know a good Tom Rooney, like even if he is stumbling, he will pick himself up. But I was like, oh, is this? And then after the first couple scenes, like, oh, no, that's just the character choice he's doing.
Yeah, but it was kind of like it happened too often and too many of those moments. And he had like a lot of great comedy in it. I did, like, as I mentioned, I liked the moment where he poured like the glasses off her. He had that very tender moment with Ophelia while she's playing her violin. And like there was good stuff in the performance, but overall, again, probably just relative to my expectations, seeing him do so many good things prior to this, I felt it fell a little short. Yes. The other one is, again, one that I think was, again, maybe just a lack of untapped potential, I guess, sort of, is the music in this production. Because, so as many of us probably know, and even if you didn't look at the credits, they did this thing, a little feature on it on the Stratford YouTube channel. So Stephen Page of the Bare Naked Ladies fame was the composer for this production, and they said in that little featurette that this was his 6th production with Stratford. And yeah, and I felt like when you bring on a bit of like of a celebrity in one of these like production roles, you kind of expect there to be something showy and more like exciting. And to me, the music kind of just was there. There were very few moments where I really felt like it was poignant and actually amplified anything, and it was kind of just very subdued in the background, which otherwise might have not bugged me so much. But when you do have like a top-billed celebrity in that spot, I wonder if there's more he could have done. I know in that same featurette that I mentioned, Antoni Cimolino said that they first worked together and Stephen Page first came to Stratford for, it was a production of As You Like It. That was like the Summer of Love, and that was, so I understand why you would want a pop or rock musician to really get behind that. So I felt like there was nothing in this production that warranted having that type of excitement. Then, like, to his credit,
Which featurette are you which part are you talking about, Ryan? If you don't mind.
It was do you remember what it's called, Nick?
Yeah, it's one. It's one. They call it like Behind the Concepts, basically.
Okay.
Like once a week, it's the literary manager of Stratford with Antoni Cimolino or the production director, and they talk about something like when they did Tempest, they brought in the set designer. In this one, they brought in the music composer.
So you're saying he was sort of the man behind the magic of Ophelia's violin bit with Tom Rooney singing?
He wrote the music for that moment.
Right.
Yeah, and like that was a nice moment, as I just said, and like it's something you said last week, Jill, about how like who in the cast is able to do a backflip. Okay, we have a backflip in the show, so I'm sure Adrian Goad is like, I can play violin, can we use this? And they integrated that, and that was a nice moment. But overall, the music, which I believe Stephen Page composed all of it, really just
he did.
None of it stuck with me. So I think that
I agree with you
is worth dinging in this way.
Yes. I will also say something to piggyback off Ryan and Tom Rooney is I wasn't a fan of Polonius being a priest.
Yeah, that was an interesting choice.
That just irked me the minute I saw it. I was like, Polonius isn't a priest. He's basically he is a suit and tie advisor to the president. He is a John Bolton. He is a kind of chief of staff for Claudius. He's not a priest figure. And the fact they had him in this kind of priestly clothes, I was like, Polonius never came across as a priest, and the fact he is one was just, the whole time I was like, I don't like this interpretation of this role this way. Change it.
See, if I had to guess, I would say that interpretation came from Ophelia's line when she has her first scene with Laertes, where she says, as some ungracious pastors do in terms of like giving advice that they don't heed, and then Polonius comes on in his cassock and starts giving his "to thine own self be true" speech. So I think that was really riffing off of that, but that feels like just a one trick banjo there that doesn't need to be permeated through the entire production.
Yes, very true. Very true. Okay, awesome. All right, Ryan, as our resident TA, as always, you're going to kick this question off for us, which is, do you think this production hit the mark, and is it worth the watching?
I would say yes. And I think, and I'm noticing this a lot more as we keep watching more of these shows in this series, and this is another one that Antoni Cimolino directed, and I think all the ones that he's directed have very much just, they do the trick just fine. There's usually nothing like very flashy or a big creative concept to them. They do what they need to do. They're a solid, straightforward production, and sometimes that's all you need. I kind of said, like, with the Lear one that he also directed, that, like, I'm a big sucker for just the standard fancy dress version of these plays, and while this one wasn't quite that, it was trying to do something a little more ambitious or not, depending on how you look at it in the costume department. I do think at its core it still had that we are not trying to outsmart the play. We have the respect for it, and we don't feel the need to do something special with it because it is already special. So, and yeah, I think once again, Goad's performance was very strong, and Hamlet will only be good if Hamlet is good. So, I would definitely recommend this show, and I think it is a solid one that I would definitely show students as like an introduction to the play.
Very good. Okay. Jill, what sayeth you?
Yeah, so wonderful little piggyback off of that. I also agree. Yes. This has hit the mark. A lot of the similar points that Ryan was making for students who are studying it, especially in high school. I think especially this production in particular, now saying it out loud, Hamlet would have come before Love's Labour's Lost in the actual season, but because we have a virtual opportunity to see these pieces and Love's Labour's Lost came first, this sort of would have been the sister production, Hamlet and Love's Labour's Lost, so a lot of the same cast members would have been in both. And I think going back to the chemistry of Love's Labour's Lost was already beautiful with all its cast, but then the fact that they were in this as well, you knew that this sort of team was a unit from the get-go, and I think because of that and the tight relationships they have with each other, it also enhanced the relationship they had with the language. So I think it's a very tight piece for outsiders coming in to really have the opportunity to watch great chemistry with actors who really have a good honus on the language as well. And with the timepiece too, I think it's a lot similar to other ways Hamlet has been done. Our production kind of did more of like a hipster emo-esque Hamlet, so that's totally different. But the more traditional sort of staging and costuming hits the mark too. And I've said this before too, but when you have actors like Tom Rooney and Mike Shera, who we've seen in a handful of this series so far, and now I will add Jonathan Goad and Adrian Gold to this sort of subcategory. I think these are actors, especially at Stratford, that with every role they play, they do a really good job of breaking sort of the traditional like properness of acting, and especially of Shakespeare. So I think especially with acting students coming in to see this production, it's a really good example of sort of marry yourself to the text, but allow your own authenticity to lead the text, and don't be afraid to add those quirky gestures and physicality that is very unique to you to the piece, because it makes me love seeing people like Tom Rooney and Mike Shera over and over and over again, because they hit the mark of the character, but you know it's still them behind the mask of the character too. And Jonathan Goad did a wonderful job of this too, going back to the chat he was having with Amaka and Antoni Cimolino in their pre-chat. They both, him and Amaka, were saying Hamlet will be whoever is playing Hamlet. Like there's never going to be the same Hamlet. And he mentioned something super amazing too, which kind of goes back into, like I'm saying, like adding more of just like the humanistic qualities that you as a human, as an actor, can bring to your characters. He was saying that Hamlet is just this sensitive person who cares deeply about people, has a fierce mind and excitement and lust for beauty and life and love. And I think a lot of actors have that too. But when you come to classical pieces, you sort of get bogged down by the history of these pieces or the people who have preceded you in these roles, that you don't necessarily always trust your own instincts. And I think when you see people, a lot of the folks in this cast go against the traditional standpoints of the characters, it's an awesome thing for youth to grasp onto too, especially youth in theater. Yeah.
Fair enough. Tanisha, how about you?
Yeah, just like to piggyback back off what Jill said, that's exactly like what I was thinking seeing this. I was like, yes, this hits the mark. If people are going to watch this, if maybe they're not familiar with the text, or it's like the first time they're coming in contact with Hamlet, beautiful way to be introduced into it, because the language, it's all understandable. And like Jill said, there are so many like authentic moments to the person, you know, that you can, it just shows actors, especially new actors, that like you can really make a role your own and add your own like isms, because like it just shows that Shakespeare deals with human emotion. That's what it is. Like, yeah, the language might be old, that's heightened text, and but it's still situations that we're in all the time, you know, love, grief, and it's so beautiful to see like how the actors in this just took it and like made it their own, but also kept it authentic to like, I don't know, just like the heightened emotion that is there. And I had another point, but I totally just lost it. But yeah, it was so good to, you know, it's a good introduction to show people, and I thought it's definitely good for like theater students. So you're not like just afraid of the text. I feel like classical is what makes people think like, oh, I have to, like Jill said, like be a certain way, like a traditional way, but there is no traditional way. Like you are you, and then you're just playing this character. So as an actor, I thought it was a great production.
And in a lot of panels before this, we've discussed how a lot of the sets or the dramaturgical swing on these traditional shows really do a good job of taking tradition and making it modern. And I've mentioned this so many times, but a personal mandate of mine as a performer is, I think we have a responsibility as performers to take texts from our past and sort of put a swing on them in the present. Because like Tanisha's saying, we deal with these things, and we have dealt with these things since the dawn of time. And so what's beautiful about this production, and Tanisha was talking about it too, of like, you can also do this with the language itself. It doesn't necessarily have to be behind a backdrop of a modern set or, you know, like I was saying, a dramaturgical thing of it. It's the actor itself that can make it modern too. So.
Fair. I will say I am conflicted on this front.
Oh.
You agree with the critics who are also conflicted.
I'm conflicted. Like, part of me goes, for performance-wise, like if I was doing something with actors, I would definitely want to show them this, because I think there's a lot of great performances we can look at, whether, once again, it's Shauna McKenna, Jonathan Goad, Geraint Wayne Davies, all these kind of great individual moments and performance pieces of the show. But then overall, because of the way the costumes and certain elements of production just didn't quite cohere together, I don't know if this is the right stage to show production, to show the entire production as like a, hey, this is a Hamlet. Like, to be honest, I'm still a big fan of Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet.
Of course you are. Why am I not surprised?
I still think that would be one I would definitely want to show first. Like, I remember before going to Stratford in 2008, my dad and I watched a few different Hamlets. Like, we watched the Kenneth Branagh, Mel Gibson. We got our hands on the Laurence Olivier one too. And like, there's a few different performances I've watched in it. And I think for production-wise, I don't know if this would be the one I would want to show as like a full-on production class. Like, here, let's watch a performance. But if I was teaching an acting class, I would go, absolutely, let's show. Because once again, this is the performance that showed the really kind of inner madness of each character. It's one of those things where you can really kind of watch these actors tick and grow throughout their performances. So I'd be like, okay, let's all just watch Shauna McKenna in the background throughout this entire play and watch her go through these different steps without ever having a big scene where we see her break and become an alcoholic. But by the end, we get why she is the way she is. Like, let's just pick this apart as an acting class. But overall, I don't know. I'm a toss bag. Something is not sitting fully right with this, where I think I could full on back showing it just as a Hamlet performance piece. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting. This is the first time where I've had that. Normally I'm like, yes, we're all for it. But this time I'm like, I'm a bit wishy-wash.
Also, apologies. I believe I've been saying Garant Lynn Davies, and it is Garant Wynn Davies. I apologize, Garant. Yes.
Thanks for watching, though.
I have the program note up, but then I wrote it down as Lynn. I'm like, that is not what the program note is. So, apologize, Garant. Wynn Davies.
Yes, it was Garant Wynn Davies.
When I meant Jonathan, so it's okay. Like,
it happens. Don't worry.
It happens.
It's the magic of live theater.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right. Tanisha, let's have you start off this next topic, which is what makes this particular character of Hamlet so favored and applauded by actors? Like, this is one of these roles where we get to see actors always wanting to take on Hamlet. He's one of the most sought after characters to be played in the Shakespeare canon. Why? Why is that after all these years?
Okay, I love that I got to start off this question because it's one that I immediately was drawn to. I think personally, it's because he is so relatable. Like, you may not have experienced grief that close to you. You may have, but there's other things that he goes through that's just so relatable to a human. We all, like, we all have to go to school. Even if you're homeschooled, you still have that, like school-esque. And then, like, just the drama with his parents and his girlfriend, like, I'm simplifying it, obviously, but it's still, like, it's just so relatable. And I think as an actor, that's easy to grab onto. And then what I think it makes him so sought after is just, like, the depth of it. Like, yes, these are problems that are relatable, but he's able to just go to, like, the extremes. So, like, grief, like, he's able to, like, as an actor, you may not have experienced it, but it's something that is, like, when it's done so well, because it's such a raw, like, human experience, and like, there's so many emotions that can go into grief, to be able to play that and you know, just try to really hone that skill is, like, a dream. Like, I would love to play Hamlet, and I think about that all the time. There was a period in my life where my dad actually passed away, and I was like, my life is Hamlet now, because he was murdered as well, and I was just like, am I Hamlet? And I had to go to school. Like, my life was mirroring it, and I was like, I see why actors would want to do this, because everything I'm feeling, like, is just, if you could watch it, it's like my life was a movie, and I could see why he was just so sought after, because that's what we watch. We watch dramas to cry and to feel stuff that maybe we haven't felt, or maybe we have, and we want to release it. So
that's exactly, and you know, you basically took the words right out of my mouth as well with what I wrote. Like, my first note in over here on my page, I wrote, his thoughts are so relatable. We've all had
that on my notes too.
Like, Tanisha, you hit the nail right on the head. Like, it's such an accessible character. Like, I can think of all of Shakespeare's canon, this is the most human and most realistic character we've had to really kind of go through as an audience. And, like, we've all had these moments of grief and of madness at the world for what's happened. And then also, like, his soliloquies are so articulate. Like, I there's so many dark moments in people's lives where, like, sometimes you do get to that really dark place of to be or not to be. And you sit there at night in the dark and you go, what if right now, like what would happen to me in the world with this? Like, it's something so tangible, and you can taste it in this character, which makes him such a wonderful part to really kind of dive into.
If I can piggyback off that too.
Yeah, Jill, go.
I think hats off to Shakespeare, I think, with this character, because he's such a standalone in his own category, because I think Shakespeare has written these soliloquies so freely, and there's such a varying scale to them. A lot of the times when I see characters do asides or soliloquies in Shakespeare, it seems a bit like in a container. But I think this is the reason why Hamlet is so sought after to do it and is so favored, because like you and Tanisha have already said, there's so much room and breadth for, we've talked about this already, but the authenticity of the actor to kind of bring it in. And this character is the epitome of a tragicomic. Like, literally on a dime, he could take us down to the pitfalls of our heart, but then bring us up to, we're laughing so hard that our stomachs hurt, you know? And that can be in like in the switch of a line. And so I actually wrote that too. Like, he makes us think, cry, and laugh sometimes at the same time. And it's that element of catharsis that, because Hamlet has the ability to really take his soliloquies and asides really outside of that fourth wall, it invites the audience to live in that catharsis with him. And yeah, like you guys said, I wrote down, he's the most relatable too, because similar to just in comparison to other works we've already seen in this series, like there's no sorcery behind Hamlet, like similar with Macker's or with The Tempest, right? When it's like there's the idea of magic or the idea of witchcraft that's sort of the catalyst to this madness or the devising factor of you know, taking what is the real world, what isn't the real world. Like this whole story is real, you know, and him as the titular character, he's our narrator, right? Whether we like it or not. So I think that's something that the audience can really get behind. There's no masks in this. I mean, within the characters themselves, yes, a lot of people are devious and definitely not be true to thine self. Yeah, no, a lot of them don't. But yeah. So Ryan, I don't know if you have any last trickling.
Yeah,
I do. I'm glad I didn't go first because I feel like my thoughts are boring by comparison. But
oh boy.
So I kind of have two thoughts on this, and one of them is kind of like the extra boring, sort of vaguely cynical thought, which is that Hamlet has become like the very sought-after role, like the most, not just in the Shakespeare canon, but just like in the canon of Western drama entirely. Everybody wants to be Hamlet, and I think that in and of itself is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you know you've made it as an actor when you are cast as Hamlet. And because so many people have done it, it really offers this great landing strip for the actor to, like, what will I do to make my Hamlet different from the others? And what can I bring to Hamlet? Because there's this, like, you can watch just on film alone, like, probably at least 50 different versions of it, and that's not even counting all the different ones on stage that happen probably every single year. So so I think part of it, while you've all brought up great points, and I'm going to add a few to those for stuff that's inherent to the character that does make it's the reason why it attained that self-fulfilling prophecy status. I think the mythology of Hamlet itself as this actor's role really does contribute to this cycle of everyone wanting to be Hamlet because everybody wants to be Hamlet. That said, nothing gets that status for no reason, and it's of course because there are a lot of greatly inherent things to the role that really make it interesting. The relatability that you've all brought up, I think, is a big part of it. But something that I also think is interesting, and Mac, you might remember this when we were in first year in our Origins of Theatre class at York, Professor Robert Fothergill, he had an interesting kind of point for why he thought was the popularity of this play and this role.
Right.
And what he mentioned was that there's a lot to be decided in here. And I think that's very interesting. Like, everything is a question. Nothing is given to you for sure. Is Hamlet mad, or is he just pretending? Is he the only one who can see the ghost, or is he just making up the ghost? And like, there's all these little things throughout there that
it falls like under the thesis of to be or not to be.
Did he really love Ophelia, or was he just pretending? Or did, what's the relationship with Ophelia? There's so many things that just aren't given to us, despite how much Hamlet just talks in this play. He's not spoon-feeding us answers that we can really unpack. Yes, this is the case. And that, I think, plays into every actor has to make these decisions for themselves. Is he mad? Does he love Ophelia? Why does he wait so long to kill Claudius? And it's all of those just bundle of opportunities really gives each actor or actress or just performer in general their chance to really make this role their own. And I think that has a lot to do with why this has remained so popular and achieved that status as the role.
And I think people really succeed in the roles when they do make it their own. All those choices, they're like, okay, like, what would I do?
Yep.
Because that's like, I don't care what you think I want you to see. What would you do? We are unique humans, right? So, yeah.
Like, there's always this idea about, like, the definitive Hamlet. Everyone has their own opinion, whether it was Laurence Olivier or Richard Burton or Kenneth Branagh. So I think it's almost like foolhardy to think that there can be a definitive Hamlet just because there have been so many different versions and each version will bring different things to it. That what's fun about Hamlet is that there can be no definitive final version. Everyone will be different and unique and interesting for that reason.
Very, very true. Okay, Jill, you're going to kick us off for the next question.
Okay.
Which is, what are pitfalls actors or actresses who play the titular role should watch for?
Yeah, so I kind of already mentioned this a bit with talking back to the authenticity of roles and how you have license and liberty to take that leap. And I think this actually piggybacks perfectly off of Ryan, and just saying that I think that a lot of the times, yes, Hamlets can fall into this not allowing themselves to explore their Hamlet, you know, and there's that comparison, especially because it is a role that has so much pressure tied to it because everyone wants to be it, or everyone has seen it in some way, or everyone has studied it in some way. And so I think it's very much, I think just a way to avoid that pitfall is just, again, this being a piece about a character's mind over like the character's actions. So it should really be rooted in that versus like the experiences that the actor as Hamlet is going through. It needs to sort of be an emotional, mental journey. And because everybody's brain is different and everybody's experiences that lend to memories and cognitive ability is different, that's where you're going to be able to kind of freely live in that Hamlet as you self versus kind of putting yourself on an unnecessary pedestal in comparison. So I think, yeah, the pitfall is to sort of fall in line with Hamlets that have come and I guess just as advice, and if I ever have the opportunity to be it too, I would want to try my hardest to kind of, I would want to be Hamlet enough to be as not Hamlet as possible. So bring that kind of avant-garde attitude as the actor to play into the character. And then in that same vein, I think there's the trap of escalating his madness too quickly. Because, you know, I've seen some productions where, yes, Hamlet is deemed mad, or he has, the way that it was carried out, you would say that, yes, madness is the end result. But then talking back to the pre-chat, like Amaka was saying, and even Jonathan Goad was saying this too, how Jonathan actually said, my Hamlet, I thought, is like the sanest person that was on that stage. And so the fact that there can be varying degrees of what said madness is, I think both Amaka and Jonathan were talking about how their Hamlets were more rooted in like the trauma and how everyone experiences trauma. It's just everyone experiences trauma in their own different ways. And so that can be classified as madness per se. But so again, I think it'll go with your particular Hamlet journey of just not being afraid to add the ebbs and flows of said madness or, you know, explosion of emotion, but bringing it back down. And I think Jonathan Goad did a really wonderful job of switching his sort of dealing with grief, you know, like putting on that comedic facade and then also breaking down, sobbing on stage. And I cannot wait to see Amaka's interpretation as well when that production goes up too. But yeah, so allow yourself to be authentic and play with the madness. I think those are two that can be pitfalls, but yeah, I invite you to
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Tanisha, what sayeth you?
I think one of the, like, I agree with Jill, like one of the big pitfalls is like trying to be like what people are expecting of Hamlet. Like that's so silly. your job as an actor is to bring you to the character because we haven't seen that. That's what's fresh. And yeah, so just keeping your authenticity there. Also, I one of the biggest things that I like irks me is when people like think that the madness is mania, or like that translates into just being like a maniac. Like there's, I feel like there is different interpretations that you could have, because we're talking like how many years ago did Shakespeare write this? Like what was considered madness then could just be like mental health issues that somebody's dealing with, like
depression,
traumatic stresses are from having your father been murdered. Like that's a thing, coupled with grief and depression. Like, and so like playing the not the modernity of like just like what we know now. This actual like madness is actually like just a bunch of different stuff that we go through as humans, like emotionally and like mentally. So yeah, like not just being like this, I don't know, like this frantic person. Or another big one is like when they're just like super sad the entire time, like it's so melancholic. Like there's moments of that, of course, but like there's just like us as humans, we're just this variety. So like playing that's where you want to go. You don't want to fall into the pitfall of just one emotion. That's the real thing for me.
Yeah, I can piggyback off that because I have similar notes to Tanisha's. Once again, Tanisha, you and I are on very similar wavelengths here today. But my first note is not playing Hamlet as either just sad and mad. Like the thing with Hamlet is especially like I went back and reread the play. I pulled the Ryan this week where I actually read the work. And there's a lot of comedy in this, especially with the character of Hamlet, between his asides and just little looks you can give as an actor. And even Amaka, like she was talking about how one of Hamlet's first lines right out of the gate is a pun. So he's very witty and he's funny. But yet a lot of times people miss that, where they just go, oh, he's depressed, he's upset, ergo, no comedy. We're going to go as bleak and as sad as we can get. But it's like, no, Hamlet is someone who's struggling with this sadness and madness of the world. And he's trying to move forward, and yet he's being anchored down by this ghost and these feelings he's having. And there's a lot more complexity. And I also love how Jonathan Goad brought up the vulnerability of Hamlet. Like there's difference between sadness and vulnerability. And the fact that Jonathan Goad goes in that bedroom scene with Gertrude, where he goes, all he wanted as a character was to grieve with his mother and lay his head on her lap and just have that moment of sadness together, and just have that vulnerability of being a young boy again, going, I've lost my dad, like God damn, like I've lost my parental guide figure of this story, and I feel like a child again. I don't have that sounding board that I had when I was growing up. And there's something with that where like Jonathan Goad talked about that, and I was like, yes, that's something that we miss a lot of the time with Hamlet, is that he's he's often played by older male actors who are in their 30s. But I'm like, no, Hamlet should be someone in his mid-20s, like someone young who is still coming through the world, who is not yet ready to take on the mantle of being king. Ergo, why Claudius ends up being the king. Not just because he marries Gertrude, but because back in the day, if you weren't deemed ready to be king, then you would then you have somebody take over that position for the time being. In fact, he is somebody who's in school, like Laertes. Like he's younger, he's still working through this, and he's lost this figure. So, ergo, yeah, I think those are the biggest things. Not playing to the madness and sadness, finding the vulnerability, and finding the humor. I think those are the big things that they need to be done as Hamlet, that actors need to watch for. And if you just play it as sad and mad, you're going to lose a lot of the colors that Hamlet can paint with.
Especially because Fortinbras makes a point of saying at the end, like, he will go down in honor. Like, you know, he is lifted in this production. He was literally lifted up. Yeah. And he's the last image we see, sort of as like this fallen Christ image. Yeah. And so that's fun. It's just because that character makes a point of saying that. It's very true, Mac. Like when you see productions where it is sort of one note, it almost doesn't give the juice that line needs. Yes. When our Fortinbras in this production said that, I was like, yes, like he will go down remembered. It sort of is a beautiful like capping of this colorful, tragic, comedic character that just falls so fastly before our eyes, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Ryan, as a director yourself, what would you advise actors on?
Yeah, so like I was going to start by saying that I myself am not an actor, so maybe take what I say as a grain of salt, and I don't direct all that often either, so definitely not an expert. I did also have a note about the more so refrain from being too melancholic, but I agree with you both that like definitely the same with the avoid being too mad or over the top in what madness looks like. But one thing that I would also kind of like to highlight, and maybe there have been little echoes of this in several of your points also, is that these lines are so well known, and I think there's no to be or not to be. That whole monologue is like the epitome of that in like all of Western literature. And what's really interesting about that speech that people, I think, have a tendency to forget, at least until they're watching a production of Hamlet or reading it, and is that monologue kind of comes out of nowhere. It's not like prompted by anything anyone says. I think there's the obvious iconography of him holding the skull and saying that, but those are two completely different scenes, and the fact that we've conflated those two in this like popular iconography just shows that we expect him to be holding Yorick's skull and thinking, ooh, should I just kill myself? But that's not what happens. But it's like in this perfect little moment in the middle of the play where he's about to come on to talk to Ophelia, and this is what's on his mind. And the second any actor starts saying the first like sentence of it, which is, you know, the whole monologue is iconic, but it's really that first two lines of it is what everybody knows. Yeah. I think the big pitfall that I've seen happen to many Hamlets is that you play that less so that it's Hamlet in that moment with his thoughts, and more so this is my to be or not to be, which it is. Every actor will have their to be or not to be moment, and you do need to make that speech your own, but I think the popularity of that and the iconicness of it can really pull you out of the immersion of the scene and the performance. And what I think makes that scene most interesting is when I really feel like, yes, this is the natural thing for Hamlet to say in that moment, and not, yes, you are an actor who nailed that speech. So that, yeah, take it for what it's worth, but that's my pitfall that I would like to see less actors getting caught up in just the weight of this is my moment, and just let themselves be Hamlet for a bit.
Yes, and Bridget talked about that too, where she said like how, especially at Stratford, where people have seen these productions so many times now, where as an actor you have to be almost ahead of them and can't sit with that to be or not to be, because as Richard points out, the audiences, there's a lot of audiences that are that are mouthing the words along with you, and they're going to be whispering that line ahead of you, and the last thing you want is to be playing catch up with the audience member whispering the whole speech in the corner off stage. So yeah, no, absolutely, like definitely, like don't sit in the weight of those lines. Just let the lines be what they are, because you won't be the last Hamlet, and you're not the first Hamlet. You are you're one of the many wonderful Hamlets that will grace a stage. So just let yourself be Hamlet. Perfect, Ryan. Well said. That actually is a very good note as a director. You definitely should give to your actor. Okay. Last but not least, we have the last question of the night, which is, with this being the most produced play in the Western world, would you say, Ryan? Like,
I would say most likely yes. I haven't run the stats, but if that's what you're asking. But it's very popular, yes.
Yes, it is. So with that being said, what can still be discovered or staged differently with this play? Because a lot of times, like, popular plays, after a while, it's like, okay, well, we've seen the Russian Revolution version of Hamlet now how many times? We've seen the medieval Hamlet done so many times. We've seen the modern Hamlet done this many times. And what is left for us to discover and do with this work? Tanisha, what do you say?
I was thinking, so I'm glad that you picked me. I think there is still so much to be discovered, because like we were talking about before we actually began the panel, they're like just starting to be now like, oh, here's a female Hamlet for you. Oh, here's a person of color playing Hamlet for you. And I think about this all the time. Like, what if Hamlet was like based in like Chicago, like Chirac, where people's dads are murdered all the time. And like this is real life. I think that's why Hamlet, we talked about, is so relatable, is because like, oh, this like actually happens. Maybe not the whole like king prince bit, but like the politics of it still, and the human relationships of it. So what I think can still be discovered is just ways to make it relatable to different groups of people. And that may like alienate other groups. Like if you made it all like if you staged Hamlet like I said, like in a ghetto, or just in a all person of color kind of cast or something, and like maybe it might be weird for some like white people watching, but at the same time it's like you're gonna learn so much, like just knowing that this can actually fit into just different cultures and different ways of being done. Also, I feel like there's so many old Hamlets, like so many old white dudes. I'm sorry. Like, younger people can feel things and express them too. As a person who felt like my life was Hamlet, I was like, I would love to play this and actually like show what I'm feeling, because it's so real. And I feel like other people feel that too. So just to see like younger Hamlets, more people of color. So that's why I'm so excited for Stratford's like upcoming production of it, right? Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, agreed. Wonderful. Ryan, what sayeth you?
Well, yeah, I think that's an excellent answer right there. Much better than anything I was going to say. But I think the framing of this question to me feels like a bit of a trap. Because to say, like, what can still be done, none of us can presume to know, like, the thousands and thousands and millions of Hamlet productions there are, that to say that, oh, I have an idea that hasn't been done, maybe it has, because there's just been so many of them. Like the fact that this one we just watched was the 9th time it's been done at Stratford alone, and the one that was going to be this year is the 10th. So, like, that's so many Hamlets. Like, how could you even, like, begin to think that, like, oh, yeah, I bet there's never been a very tall Hamlet, or, I don't know, just to come up with something glib. But I think, yeah, there's definitely still interesting things. Something that I'd like to see more of, and there certainly have been these already, is just different plays or stories that take the building blocks of Hamlet but do something else with it entirely. Like, one of my favorite plays is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard, which is such a wonderful reimagining of the Hamlet story from the perspective of these two goofy side characters. Also, like, Beckett's Endgame is like another good example that has been popularly interpreted as this is what's going on inside Hamlet's skull during the entire duration of the performance. Yeah, like the whole plot of it. The Lion King, I kind of sigh a bit when people invoke this, because there aren't that many similarities to Hamlet, but it very clearly is the inspiration. Yes. Like, my favorite scene in The Lion King is the one where Simba and Nala's brother wrestle in her grave, and he sends Timon and Pumbaa to their deaths in England. Like, obviously it's not a one-to-one comparison, but, like, there certainly is that. And then Lion King 1.5, of course, is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, showing what they've been up to the whole time. Yeah, I also saw this pretty interesting play. It was at the Undercurrents Festival in Ottawa in, I believe, 2007. It was by a playwright named Curtis Goad. It was called The Assassination of King Hamlet I. And it was a prequel play about Hamlet's father, like, navigating court politics, fighting Fortinbras and the Norwegian army, his conniving brother conspiring against him, and that was a really cool play. I haven't seen this yet, but last year Daisy Ridley was in this Ophelia movie. I don't know if any of you saw that. That sounds like an interesting idea. So, like, while, yes, there certainly are more things to do with just productions of Hamlet, I'm always curious to see what else we can do with Hamlet. And that might be how I choose to answer this question for now. Yeah. Mainly just because I don't have ideas of my own for what to do with an exciting new production.
I do, but I'm keeping that to myself.
Smart to protect that intellectual property.
I am. But I will piggyback off you, Ryan, because I wrote very similar notes where I go, because this is being produced all over the Western world, it's very likely that you've had a similar concept done somewhere else. But what I think is what's neat to discover is, even if you are both, like say Tanisha and I are both directors, and Kip and I both decide to do Chicago inner city Hamlet,
yours will be very different, I'm sure.
Exactly. Like directorially, you'll be very different in your interpretations of that text. I think that's where, as a director and actor, you can kind of go in those places where where each production, even though there may be a similar concept, would still be a different way of going about it. But at the same time, I think this has now become more of a play for audiences to discover themselves and discover and kind of discover that inner working of Shakespeare, where this kind of play has kind of graduated beyond just being a play by Shakespeare. It's now become this piece that is this universal piece of humanity that and that audiences get to come to every few years and discover. That's why I love reading it in grade 12 in high school, was because it was the perfect time when you're just coming of age, you're about to move off into the world, you're about to be like Laertes going off to school. I bet to thy own self be true speech is so powerful when you're leaving to go to university or college for the first time. It's that wider world play that's going to open you up to saying, hey, the world knows how you're feeling. We've all gone through this communal experience together. And I think that's why this play is still something to be discovered for audiences more than actors and directors now, because actors and directors, we've all kind of come across these same concepts a few times before. But as an audience, you may never have read Hamlet before, but the first time you come to it and you see this production, Jonathan Goad is now your inaugural Hamlet, and it will always be your inaugural Hamlet. It's the same time of going to see a musical for the first time, and whoever is your Alexander Hamilton, your Jean Valjean, your Phantom of the Opera, your Christine Daae, that first one you see will always be that special person and inform the way you interpret that piece going forward. So I think that's what Hamlet gives us. It gives us this beautiful venue to experience actors and directors' concepts, but as an audience, it gives you that chance to meet this great piece of work that needs to be done because people need to see it because it's a very human piece. Jill, wrap us up on this.
Yeah, Matt, you wove greatly into my second point, which was every Hamlet will be astronomically different. Every director or approach to this piece will be different too. So I really do think if a collection of towns were given a specific time period and a specific era and a specific cast and a specific representation of humanity too, every piece is still going to be very, very different. And because like you said, this piece provides so much access to the actors and the audience. And as we mentioned before, I'm super stoked for this upcoming Hamlet production at Stratford, because definitely, BIPOC representation, of course, because this is such a piece that speaks to all of humanity in some shape or form. We definitely need to see more of humanity reflected in the piece itself. So I would love to see an all Black cast of this. I think that would be so great and such a different experience for me and for every audience member sitting in the audience, regardless of generation too. There's definitely, just kind of going back to the whole alcoholism in this particular production, it was a lot of the older generational characters that were using that as a vice, where you never really saw that in Ophelia and Hamlet. And I think it's subtle, but that is another layer or a facet of this piece that can be toyed with too. And the idea of using vices, or the idea of pushing against society, I think there's so many ways that can be reflected in this piece, and those layers are going to be fortified even more by extending this opportunity to all people. So, and another thing that I don't mind sharing my directorial potential wanting to do with this piece, because I don't know if it'll ever happen, because I tend to be a huge transitions queen. I love my transitions, and I want to fill those transitions with the backstories of characters. So if we remember with Mackers, I was I want to know more about the Macduffs. I want to know their history, and I kind of want a little sideshow of them. And so I think with this piece too, and especially with our Ophelia and Hamlet being very different, their relationship is very different, and the approach that both actor took to their individual roles was very different. For example, I kind of would maybe want to see a production where that relationship can build, because a lot happens with them off stage, or it's a lot of hearsay about the relationship, but if through the transitions you kind of see little silhouettes or little vignettes of that, and maybe even Laertes' journey too, right? Like he hears about the death of his father, he hears about the death of his sister. Like, where is he? You know, where did he comes in such an anger, but it's like, how did that build? Was that immediate? You know, I feel like again there, and then same going back to the chortling Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Like, yes, they did a whole play on them in particular, but within the piece too, I think you could embed another layer of that serious or comedic conversation between those two. Yeah, and then just going back to the idea of Gertrude and Claudius drinking, because that was such an element in this piece. We see them sort of, because I don't even think Claudius was as far into the drink as Gertrude was at the end of the play, at least in my opinion. But then in the scene where he has his own monologue, he is quite drunk too. So I want to know, like, are you guys drinking alone? Are you drinking together? Do you guys trigger each other's drinking habits? Like, this again was all dialogue or character work that was off the stage. And so, yeah, I guess if I were to do this production, it would be cool to unveil even more sort of the psyches of these characters, and maybe that can be put into transition work or whatever when staging this piece. But yeah, that's like my production side.
So if anybody watching this steals that idea, thank Jill in the credits or in the program.
There you go.
Or you know, hire me on as a dramaturg or an assistant director to kind of dot your I's and cross your T's.
Love it. Love it. And that's it for this version of Hamlet, our little breakdown. Thank you all for joining us. Tanisha, welcome to the fold. I'm so happy you got to join us for this episode. Where can people find you if they want to follow you on some socials?
They can follow me on Instagram. My name is Tanisha Sinclair, Sinclair, no E at the end. And same name on Facebook if you want to follow me. I'm there too. Great.
Wonderful. Ms. Jill?
Yes, so as per usual, my artist Instagram is at Jillian with a J .Robinson96. Yeah, you'll find me there. I'm also into musicals and just doing fun, quirky stuff on the side too. So you get to see all my colors on there.
Love it. Ryan, give us your regular message.
I'm not on most social medias, and the only one I'm on, I don't want friend requests from strangers, so just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock. We have some exciting stuff coming up. We have more of the one-on-one artist interviews episodes of the Cup. By this time, I believe you've already seen one of them with Dandelion Theater, but hopefully you've seen it. If not, go click on that. Maybe it's in the recommendeds on the side there, who knows. But yeah, you can watch that. There's more of those coming up the pipeline. We also are very excited to have our polished reading of Ghosts coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. Yes. And yeah, just like, share, and subscribe on all platforms.
Beautiful. And you can find me on all social media platforms at Mackenzie Horner. Just look for the ginger guy in the profile picture. I'm always posting fun things there, doing the Playbill Song Challenge. And then you can always follow our podcast account that I am part of with our friend Autumn Smith, called Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast, where on a bi-weekly basis we're breaking down a show. When this comes out next week, we will be just about to release our episode about Witches of Eastwick, the musical that Autumn herself worked on with Ian McShane in the West End. So there's lots of great stories to be had on that episode, so be sure to tune in for that. But until next time, we'll see you all next week with our next episode, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the lesser done history plays. If I'm not mistaken, let me just confirm.
It's King John. Yes.
Exactly. Once again, featuring Shauna McKenna coming back into the fold for another episode. So we'll be
for another play. We have not gotten Shauna McKenna on the Cup yet, but Shauna, if you're watching, we can make room for you. No, come on anytime. Talk to Bridget; she'll put in a good word for us, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, true. Keep your eyes peeled. Bridget is returning in a few weeks for another episode, and we also have another Stratford actor who we will not reveal yet, but who is coming
He's
down the
kind of a
pipeline.
big deal.
It's
The
kind of a
biggest
big deal.
deal.
Yeah. So be sure to stay tuned for that announcement because we'll make a special announcement of.
We have mentioned his name as a slight clue. So
yes, we frequently praise him because he's frequently in these shows and frequently praiseworthy.
Okay, enough clues. Enough clues.
Oh, so many
enough clues. Enough clues. Either way, raise a cup.
We're looking forward to having you if you're watching.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, and have a great week, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and until next time, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.